After the Iowa caucuses, the rest of early voting kicks off with 3 more contests in February. New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina hold just 155 pledged delegates combined, but these states can play a key role in setting the tone for the rest of the early nomination process. For more analysis, I want to bring in some of our CBS News 2020 campaign reporters who've been covering those early voting states. LaCrai Mitchell is in Charleston, South Carolina. Alex Tin joins me from Henderson, Nevada, and Nicole Sganga joins me from Manchester, New Hampshire. Welcome to all of you. Alex, let's start with you. We just heard our colleague Lana Zach speak to a campaign spokesperson for Mike Bloomberg. You've been covering the state of California. How would you assess his ground game there so far?
Well, today, Elaine, while all the other candidates are focused on Iowa, Mike Bloomberg was campaigning in California, where he rolled out a handful of new endorsements, including the current mayor of Compton and the former mayor of Los Angeles, as well as announcing that he plans to ramp up his already massive campaign staff in the state of California up to 800 total staff. That's more than all the other candidates combined in the state of California. Now, Mike Bloomberg, in addition to that, has been spending a lot on advertising. He's become well known among some circles in California. And like he said today, he sees his path to victory as going through California's massive, nearly 500 delegate haul. But in recent polls in the state of California, including just one that we saw from the Los Angeles Times a few days ago, Mike Bloomberg is still barely polling at 6%, far behind Bernie Sanders at 26% and Elizabeth Warren at 20%. That's going to be a tough hill for Mike Bloomberg to climb as early voting starts today in California.
Well, switching gears now, as we've been reporting, 2/3 of voters in Iowa still did not have their minds made up over the weekend. Nicole, the New Hampshire primary is on February 11th. Are voters there looking to Iowa for some sense of direction? And if not, do people there know who they'll be supporting?
Well, Elaine, you'll be surprised, I'm sure, to hear that voters here in New Hampshire are just as undecided about who to pick in this upcoming presidential primary. According to a recent CNN UNH poll, out of Democratic likely voters in New Hampshire, about 49% say they still haven't made up their mind. Half of the remaining say they're leaning towards someone, but could still change their vote ahead of February 11th. And now we know historically that New Hampshire tends to go its own way. Back in 2008, when Iowa was won by then Senator Barack Obama, New Hampshire instead chose then Senator Hillary Clinton. In 2016, when Iowa chose Secretary Hillary Clinton, New Hampshire decided to vote for nearby lawmaker Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. And so New Hampshire does tend to support those candidates that spend a lot of time here doing retail politics. We have 2 candidates from neighboring states competing here in that top tier. Senator Bernie Sanders, again, seeing if he can make waves in New Hampshire, and of course, nearby Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren. So certainly top contenders here. But we also know that there are very strong organizations being built on the ground by Mayor Pete Buttigieg, certainly the former Vice President Joe Biden, and Senator Amy Klobuchar. And so truly anyone's game, but certainly a lot of undecided voters looking to see who they'll choose and what this next week holds.
Well, LaCrai, voters there in South Carolina have just a little more time. Their primary is February 29th. Do they have their minds made up at this point?
I have to say, Elaine, keeping in theme with the undecided voters, a recent Post and Courier Change research poll came out here in South Carolina over the weekend, and it showed that 10% of the Democratic electorate were still undecided, which isn't as much as the 40+ in some of the other early states, but I do think that it leaves room for those people the voters that I've met, who say they're still deciding. And the different teams on the ground are taking advantage of that. You know, they're using these final days in this countdown here to organize surrogate events. They have surrogates coming through the state. They're getting together and having strategy meetings where they're talking about what is it about our candidate's message that we can convince someone in the next few days, in the next couple of weeks. What are the characteristics that they say they're looking for in a candidate, and how can we use that to help connect them with our candidate? So you definitely see where teams on the ground are still working. And I'm actually currently at a Pete Buttigieg watch party for tonight, and Senator Sanders is having one as well. So you can see even on nights like tonight, you have different teams on the ground here who are using this opportunity to invite different voters to come into their office and see their space, meet their team, but most importantly, learn more about their candidate.
Nicole, we know that things work a little differently in the Iowa caucuses, but how does organizing work in New Hampshire?
Well, New Hampshire is the nation's first primary. So primaries are very different from caucuses. You go into a ballot box in a primary, you choose a ballot, and you just pick your candidate, and that's it. Caucuses, we know, involve a lot more organization, precinct captains. A lot of people gather in a large room, and it's a process that takes several hours. Another thing to keep in mind that during Iowa caucus night, a candidate needs to reach 15% support in a room in order to be considered viable and in order to send delegates to the convention. That doesn't happen here in New Hampshire, and so that means that underdog candidates, lesser-known candidates that might not have the opportunity to reach 15% viability in some of the precincts and some of the caucus sites in Iowa do have a chance to make their mark here in New Hampshire. Candidates like entrepreneur Andrew Yang, candidates like Senator Bennett from Colorado, Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, Massachusetts former Governor Deval Patrick. And that's also why 3 of those candidates I just mentioned, the latter 3, are here in New Hampshire right now instead of campaigning in Iowa during the caucus. They're getting a head start on the primary, hoping to make a splash come February 11th. It also has changed some of the organizing on the ground. Certainly a lot of door knockers getting out in these cold temperatures to try to bring people out to vote. And as we continue to talk about these undecided voters, it's important to keep in mind that campaigns know that some of these folks are still making up their minds. So instead of just identifying their voters and bringing them out to the polling sites, they're also trying to persuade them in the process. So a lot of persuasion happening right up to the final bitter end of this February primary season.
All right, Alex Tin, LaCrai Mitchell, and Nicole Sganga, thank you all very much.